This is Duke University.
It is really wonderful to be here and an honor to be closing this great event. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Claudia, Antonio, Del. Especially thanks to all the students who came this afternoon as well. Set my timer. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of translation, and then I will switch to my own work. So this is from a book called Valdivia by a Chilean poet named Gallo Gigliotto. This was the book that Alex referenced as winning the National Translation Award. Which is kind of funny because the book was out of print in Chile and not widely known or thought of. So Gallo Gigliotto is a youngish Chilean poet, I believe born in 1977, and Valdivia is a city in southern Chile where he was born, and the book is a kind of coming-of-age narrative. And there's a speaker and his mother who are fleeing an abusive father amid many of the kind of characteristic features of Valdivia. So it's a city that had the biggest earthquake ever recorded in 1960. It's a city where it rains constantly, and then there's a kind of mixture of indigenous and local mythologies that are sort of folded into the book. I'll read a little bit from the Spanish, and then I'll read a little bit from the English. It's divided into numbers, though not very chronologically. Uno. Trozos de hielo de otro planeta porque es azul, petróleo, calipso, oscuro, hielo blando y falso como muelas de gel congeladas al interior de un plástico rectangular celado al vacío y letras color gris claro, 3M azul y calipso y gel y 30 centímetros de bolsa rectangular celada al vacío y durmiendo como un pequeño cojín amigable y cariñoso sobre la cara moreteada violácea de mi madre, Carmen, mi nodriza, lavándole los ojos con sus lágrimas, estertores dibujan burbujas de sangre. 2. Dicen que había una inundación de sangre. Ella estaba recostada al pie de una sofá, los brazos de Carmen en el suelo, por donde rojo yo trataba de caminar hacia ella, resbalándome en su sangre, en la sal que caía por mis zapatos, tan pesado. Lo dicen, yo no recuerdo, solo recuerdo que lo dicen y tal vez algo recuerdo cuando lo hacen, pero prefiero que no. 3. Sobre el puente Pedro de Valdivia, 2 autos chocan. De parabrisas salimos volando, mi madre y yo, 40 metros a caer al río, calle, que corre lentamente bajo nuestro, sobre nuestro de repente, y 2 hombres quedan sobre el puente, estirando sus brazos con los puños cerrados. Yo muero. Ella muere mientras chocan sus cuernos. Yo muero, ella muere. Qué fácil se infiltran los demonios en el día. Valdivia 1. Chunks of ice from another planet because it's blue, petroleum, dark calypso, fake squishy ice like molars made of gel, frozen inside in a rectangular plastic vacuum packed with light gray letters 3M, blue, and calypso and gel, and 30 centimeters of rectangular bag, vacuum packed and sleeping like a sweet, friendly little cushion over my mother's bruised violet face, Carmen, my wet nurse, washing her eyes with her tears, death rattles draw bubbles of blood. 2. They say there was a flood of blood. She was leaning back at the foot of a couch in Carmen's arms on the floor where red I tried to walk towards her, slipping in her blood and the salt that fell on my shoes that were so heavy. They say this, I don't remember, I only remember they say this, and maybe I remember something when they do it, but I would prefer not to, I would prefer not to, I would prefer. 3. On the Pedro de Valdivia bridge, 2 cars collide. We went flying through the windshield, my mother and I falling 40 meters into the Calle river that runs slowly beneath us, over us suddenly, and 2 men are still up on the bridge, stretching their arms with their fists clenched. I die, she dies, while their horns collide. I die, she dies, how easily the demons infiltrate the day. 5. My father's figure, as if clipped from a photograph from the hallway of a house, a nice house in a good neighborhood. It was super important to keep up appearances for the neighbors, all doctors like the dentist who let me figure out the Christmas farce the night he dressed up like as Santa Claus with his apron on under and his hands smelling like dental anesthetic. 40. Santa Claus has emptied his sack and he's filled it with dead kids. He picks them off the surface of the river, and there are thousands around in the trees. The birds with human faces watch, waiting for intestines to float on the river so they can eat. But Santa Claus has turned into a bigger monster as his gaze gives off beams which provide light over the river, and you can see arms and fallen faces alone on the water, faces that float with an expression of the infinite on the water. His bag sweats blood. The water crashes slowly into the rocks, and every once in a while the birds laugh in the trees. They laugh with rage, they laugh with sorrow, they laugh with hunger, they laugh with envy. If one tries to come closer, 12 deer with giant white fangs, eyes and flaming antlers fly until they trap it in the air and shred it to pieces. In a fraction of a second, its human face turns into a kid who falls into the river. Tonight, the moon slobbers little silver drops in the sky. The harvest looks like it will never run out. Anyone who is still alive dies asphyxiated from the pestilence that emanates from Santa Claus's suit, a suit of rabbit skin and blood, the smell of dental anesthetic from beneath the river. I make the tide rise with my sorrow. So the birds with the human faces is one of the kind of local folk stories. And I'll read one more piece from the very end of the book. This is the final piece. 21. The guests are arriving to fill their bellies with martinis. They like the minibar. I like the toaster oven where my mom makes grilled cheese on white bread for all of the guests. I like the J&B swizzle sticks. They are yellow with bright red letters. They like the Betamax. They say there are 2 in all of Valdivia. For those young people in the audience, a Betamax was a VCR made by Sony that lasted about 2 years. They like the Betamax. They say there are 2 in all of Valdivia. One of the guests tell me this as if this should make me feel proud. They like my mother, platinum blonde. They tell her she looks like Raquel Welch. I like Rafaela Carra. I'm 3 or 4 years old. I tell my mother that when I'm older, I will marry Rafaela. The guests arrive. First, the doctor who circumcised me and his wife. They start smiling from the entrance. Then my pediatrician and his spouse. Both women are ugly. They give my mother a weird look when she doesn't look at them. They whisper in each other's ears. A portrait hangs on the wall of the living room of a very beautiful and sad boy who sheds 1 tear from only 1 eye. I imagine this boy is somewhere in Valdivia. The guests have all arrived. It's time for me to go to bed. I don't want to let go of my J&B swizzle stick, yellow with bright red letters. I am jolted by an explosion of laughter. I looked at the guests sitting in the living room and at those who lean out the windows hanging from invisible threads with the languid faces who are not people, long and thin arms with coppery skin. They are barely visible. Invisible threads move that guide the eyes of the people talking, sitting beneath them. One of them spots me, stares at me intently. His eyes are like mine. He moves his lips, but I don't understand. Tonight I will dream of exploding porcelain dolls. I will dream of blood waves softly fluttering one over the other. They all watch me now. They are barely visible in the windows hanging in the air. The guests, Carmen will put me to bed in my parents' room. They all say goodbye to me, moving their arms. So do the others. Carmen leaves me in the bed and shuts the door. I keep hearing the laughter, and I want to go back, but my own guests arrive. In the wardrobe, black, glimmering, evil. Outside the windows, over the tambourines. The birds with human faces, the tree that is not a tree moves, its shadow projected on the curtain. On the main street of the Via Rucawe, a procession of men and women walk to the river, dressed in white, moved by the moonlight, outside the wind, outside almost always the rain of Valdivia, outside the howls of a wolf wounded by a moonbeam, inside the guests who came to stay in my house, who came to stay in my house forever. So then I'll read from a variety of my projects, including the new book, Lake Michigan, and I will go, for the meantime, in chronological order. So this is from In the Murmurs of the Rotten Carcass Economy, and that's also the name of the poem. Begins with a quote from Marguerite Duras. It's true, there is the innocence of life. 1. I can't actually write the question. There are too many things that get in my way. There are bodies sticking together in broken ways. There are bodies that make up sentences, and I'm going to have to delete the question I wrote, but now I'm ashamed of it because it refers to the relationship between X concept in the fake world and Z thing in the real world, and I'm afraid of the bodies and how they are lining them up in the compounds, afraid of the bodies that make sentences, afraid of the bodies and how they are like sentences that begin with conjunctions. I love to begin sentences with conjunctions. I love it when they line the bodies up in holes or in stadiums and they form the bodies into words and sentences. There are marching bands and ghosts, and then there are bodies with the authority to remove skin, but please don't use the word shed. It doesn't quite encapsulate the experience I am talking about. Think of Paris and the lights over the Seine on Christmas Eve. Think about the muddy Mapocho River in winter. There is hardly any water in it. Think of Sissy Spacek and Jack Lemmon and the midget who says, hay otro, as he points to another body floating down the river. End stop, period. The authoritative bodies had ideas about fingernails. Could they be used as commas? They hated semicolons. They didn't believe in adjectives. All of the people I love are in love with the absence of adjectives. 2. I'm curious about aesthetics and revolution and whether or not aesthetics can only exist in the absence of revolution, but it's disgusting to pose such questions while driving in a heated Japanese car through the grit of a shit snow night in a crumbling city in the Midwestern United States of America, or on a bus tour of a city in the island to the south where on the sidewalk children sit eating cardboard sandwiches drizzled with soy sauce from plastic packets, and a voice on the loudspeaker says, "To your left, you will see an X-type person. We don't have many X-type people in our city. We consider it good luck to see an X-type person, and it was just our lucky day because there, munching on a cardboard sandwich drizzled with soy sauce, was an X-type person announcing the beginning of a movement away from one thing and towards another thing. It is impossible to know what these things are, but I am certain there's an aesthetics of crumbling buildings, and in the murmurs of the rotten carcass economy, I hear something I will mention to you when the words have taken over my mouth." 3. Writing is the pace of the written word passing through your body. There is a little plastic packet of soy sauce and a cardboard sandwich being eaten by a little person, and then there is a data chip I would like to insert into your skin, dear reader, dear data body, and I would like the data chip to cause things to grow inside of you. I am in love with the little flowers growing inside of you. Inside of you is the smallest woman in the entire world. Inside of you is a disgusting feeling, a sensation like that when you touch the impossible spot, the one that no one ever touches. If there weren't things like this, writes Duras, writing would never take place. And by things like this, she means anonymous dead bodies on the ground in anonymous sleepy villages. I slept in a fancy hotel across the street from an enormous hole where the skin and the hair of the fallen bodies were drilled into by bulldozers. This thing called love. Data body, my love. I would not be opposed to having my pants ripped into shreds if I knew they could keep the fire going a bit longer. I would not be opposed to having my walls knocked down if the wood in the walls could keep the fire going a bit longer. I would not be opposed to depositing your cardboard sandwich into the flames if I thought it could keep us warm for just another minute longer. Breath glue, word, brick, wood, nail, gum, something that is held together evolves into a structure that cannot be contained by soldiers or language or ideas. Think of a bowl of pistachio gelato at the top of the Spanish Steps. Think of a battle between a figurative body and a literal body in which there is no chance the literal body will ever win. Think of a little person as she squats on the ground of a foreclosed property. History is inserting itself into her mouth and veins. There is nothing we can do about the fact that the ceiling will destroy her soft and crumbly body. 6. It's calm here now. The main horror is the idea, the word, the body. There is this sentence, and there is the ongoing nightmare of a continuously deteriorating nation. 7. In conclusion, there's the flood and the bodies it washes to shore. There are the bags of money in the moment they are hurled from the window. There are the banks and there are the explosions. There are the buildings and the aesthetics of the crumble. There are the cities and there are the machines that no longer collect their feces. There are the rivers and there are the dead birds that occupy them. There are the beaches and the broken cities beneath them. There are the animal cages and there are citizens who sit in them. There's the poem and there's the very last word spoken by the body that threw itself in front of a tank. There's the highway and the man who sets himself aflame on the side of it. There's the church and the bodies that frame it. There, in the space after the period and between the first word of the sentence of the new era. Here, in the space after the comma and the first breath taken in the new era. Here, in the sheets of the hospitalized refugees in the state on the other side of the river. After, the after, the after, the after. There are words, and there is nothing to say about them. I'll read a few pieces from the performance of Becoming Human. The performance of Becoming Human. On the side of the highway, I'll stop for 1 sec. So there's a quick reference here to the second episode of Speedy Gonzales in 1955, which I've often read this piece with that playing in the background. There's some other references as well, but that piece is all about immigration politics in a very kind of poignant and contemporary way. The performance of Becoming Human. On the side of the highway, 1,000 refugees step off a school bus and into a sun that can only be described as blazing. The rabbi points to the line the refugees step over and says, "That's where the country begins." This reminds me of Uncle Antonio. He would have died had his tortured body not been traded to another country for minerals. Made that up. This is a story about diplomatic protections. The refugees were processed through Austria or Germany or maybe Switzerland. Somehow they were discovered in some shit village in some shit country by European soldiers and taken to an embassy where they were promptly bathed, injected with vaccines, interrogated, etc. Their bodies were traded by country A in exchange for some valuable natural resource needed by country B. There was only one gag, says the rabbi, as he tucks his children into bed. So the soldiers took turns passing the filthy thing back and forth between the mouths of the two prisoners. The mother and son licked each other's slobber off the dirty rag that had been in who knows how many other mouths. You love to write about this, don't you? I am paid by the word for my transcriptions. Just one more question about the gag. He wants to know what color the gag was, what it was made of, how many mouths had licked it. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. They used their belts to bind them by the waist to the small cage they were trapped in. Everything reminds me of a story about an ape captured on a boat by a group of European soldiers who showed him how to become human by teaching him how to spit and belch. Everything is always about the performance of becoming human. Observing a newly processed refugee, the rabbi says, I have seen those blue jeans before. At times like this, he thinks, I can say just about anything right now. This is, after all, a bedtime story for the end of the world. I am moving beneath the ground and not sleeping and trying to cross the border from one sick part of the world to another. But where is the light and why does it not come in through your bloody fingers? You hold your bloody fingers before my eyes and there is light in them, but I cannot see it. You say, there are countries in my bloody fingers. I am interested in the the borders, or I am interested in the gas chambers in your collapsible little fingers. You put them to my face and I see your hands open, and in them I see a thick wall and a sky and an ocean, and 10 years pass, and it's still nighttime, and I am falling, and there are bodies on the ground in your bloody hands. Think about the problem really hard, then let it go, and when you least expect it, a great solution will appear in your mind. The broken bodies stand by the river and wait for the radiation to trickle out of the houses and into their skin. They stand under billboards and sniff paint, and they know the eyes that watch them own their bodies. A more generous interpretation might be that their bodies are shared between the earth, the state, and the bank. The sentences are collapsing one by one, and the bodies are collapsing in your bloody hands, and you stitch me up and pray I will sleep, and you tell me of the shattered bus stops where the refugees are waiting for the buses to take them to the mall where they are holding us now, and there's a man outside our bodies making comments about perspective and scale and light, and there is light once more in your bloody fingers. All I see is the sea and my mother falling in, and my mother and father falling into it. Again, that's like the most boring image ever. The water is frozen. We are sleeping on the rocks, watching the cows on the cliff, and you tell me they might fall and break open, and that sheep and humans and countries will fall out of them, and that this will be the start of the bedtime story you will tell me on this, our very last night on earth. Come closer, you say with your eyes. Move your bloody face next to mine and rub me with it. We are dying from so many stories. We are not complete in the mind from so many stories of burning houses, missing children, slaughtered animals. Who will put the stories back together, and who will restore the bodies? I am working towards the end, but first I need a stab, a small slice. The stories, they are there, but we need a bit more wit. We need something lighter to get us to the end of the story. Did you hear the one about the guy who picked up chicks by quoting the oral testimonies of the illiterate villagers who watched their brothers and sisters get slaughtered? Or, andale, arriba, arriba, welcome to Tijuana. You cannot eat any more barbecued iguana. Have you met Speedy Gonzalez's cousin? His name is Slowpoke Rodriguez. In Espanol se llama Lento Rodriguez. He's a drunk little fucking mouse. His predator, the lazy cat baking in the sun, thinks he will taste good with chili peppers, but there's something I forgot to tell you. Slowpoke always pack a gun, and now he's going to blow your flabbergasted feline face off. It was 1987, and my friends from junior high trapped me on the floor and mashed bananas in my face and sang, "It's no fun being an illegal alien." You know, you can die from so many stories. The Putty Cat guards the Ajax cheese factory behind the fence right across the border. The wetback mice see the gringo cheese. They smell the gringo cheese. Your gringo cheese, it smells so good. They need Speedy Gonzalez to get them some ripe, fresh, stinky gringo cheese. Do you know this Speedy Gonzalez? Asks one of the starving wetback mice. I know him. Speedy Gonzalez friends with my sister. The mice laugh. Speedy Gonzalez friends with everybody's sister. Ha! The little border-crossing sneak-fucking mouses think it's cute that they're invading our culture to steal our cheese, but it don't make a difference because you and I, we are taking a stroll on the electrified fence of love, because I feel a little Southern Californian transnational romance coming on right about now. I feel like Daniel from The Karate Kid because I too once had a Southern Californian experience where I wasn't aware I was learning ancient Japanese secrets when I was waxing on and waxing off. And I am with you, Mr. Miyagi, in Reseda. I am with you, Mr. Miyagi, in Pasadena. And I am with you, Mr. Miyagi, at the All Valley Karate Tournament. And I am with you, Mr. Miyagi, in Okinawa, where you went in Karate Kid 2 to meet your long-lost girlfriend when you discovered she wasn't married off when she was just a teenager to your fiercest Okinawan rival. And I am with you, Mr. Miyagi, in Tijuana, where it's murder and diarrhea and always kinda kinky. But seriously, friends, what do you make of this darkness that surrounds us? They chopped up 24 bodies last night, and today I have to pick up my dry cleaning. In the morning, I need to assess student learning outcomes as part of an important administrative initiative to secure the nation's future by providing degrees of economic value to the alienated urban youth. So for now, hasta luego, compadres, and don't worry too much about the bucket of murmuring shit that is the United Statesian night. What does it say? What does it say? What do you want it to say? So I'll switch to some pieces from Lake Michigan. This book just came out. It begins a little bit where the performance of Becoming Human ends off in a kind of fictionalized prison on the shores of Lake Michigan in Chicago, and is thinking about various scenes, real-life scenes of police violence towards brown and black communities in Chicago. And so Lake Michigan is structured in 2 acts and then broken into 19 scenes. It begins with two sets of epigraphs. The first from Simone de Beauvoir, who says, "On a Sunday afternoon, I reached a lake surrounded by green lawns. In the sunlight, the waters reminded me of silk and floating diamonds. Sailing bodies were moving over them. It was the luxury of the Côte d'Azur. There was nothing to remind one of the squalor with its human wreckage. Crowds of people were sitting on the grass in the bright sunshine. There were well-behaved, loving couples. Young people had got up a game of baseball on the lawns, and children were darting in and out of bushes, playing at Indians. A spring day made for leisure. Seagulls flew over the lake, and Chicago appeared as a city, huge, wealthy, and gay." And the next is from the great Peruvian poet César Vallejo, who says, "Le pegaban todos sin que él les haga nada." They hit him they beat him even though he does nothing to them. Lake Michigan, scene 1. "They beat me even though I did nothing. I don't know what day it was, but they beat me on the beach. They beat me with iron paws. The mayor ordered the police superintendent to beat me. The police superintendent ordered an officer to beat me. The officer ordered his dogs to attack me. Then someone beat me with iron paws. Then someone kicked me with iron boots. Then someone shot me. Then someone buried me in the sand. Then someone scooped me out of the sand and dumped me somewhere, and I was dead. But I could feel the sand on my body. I could feel the sand filling my mouth. I could feel the sand in my eyes. There was an earthquake in my eyes. There was a tornado in my mouth. But after the storms passed, it was peaceful and I was dead, and they beat me even though I did nothing. They said I was illegal. They said I was an immigrant. They said I was an illegal immigrant who roamed the streets in a gang. They said I raped people. They said I killed people. They said I smuggled drugs in my gastrointestinal tract. They said I didn't speak the right language. They said my boss exploited me and I tried to kill him. They said my boss treated me well and I tried to kill him. They said my heart was dark. They said I peddled in blood. They said this is only war and that I had the audacity to think my body could resist the state. Let death come quickly, I asked. Let death be easy. But I did not know how long it would take. I did not know I would be under the sand forever. I did not know that in Chicago the bodies do not die when they have been strangled or riddled with bullets. A journalist asked the mayor why they killed us. I'm not responsible, said the mayor. There will be an inquest, said the mayor. We will bring the perpetrators to justice, said the mayor. He was wearing a slim-fitting suit and he looked handsome as the hurricane entered his mouth. He was wearing a slim-fitting suit and he looked handsome as he pretended he did not live in a city of state-killed cadavers. He had gel in his hair and his shoes were nicely polished. I died, and I died again, and a voice said something about hope. Another voice said, you pay a big price for hope. I dragged myself around the sand and I tried to make it to the water because I thought the water might carry me away, but each time I took a step closer to the water moved farther from my body, and there were faces in the water and they were calling to me and I was trying to get to them. It's what you do when you are dead. But every time I took a step toward the water drew farther away. And the faces in the water were murmuring and their murmurs grew louder and louder as I moved nearer and farther. It is only war, a voice said, by way of explanation, as he photographed my dead body on the sand. And I was dead, though I was still breathing when I finally made it to the water. And in the water, there was another war going on in the waves. It was only the beginning of the war that would kill me again and again. Lake Michigan, scene 5. The beach falls, so they say. The infected beach falls sky downward. The city falls under the astral balls. The city sways from one side of the street to another. The infected beach whines and screeches, the exhaustion of anticipating collapse. The infected beach falls next to another infected beach. The city is bored with forgetting that the chase for victims is not supposed to be boring. The city takes the first shot and the beach crumbles. We don't speak as they shoot or we're beaten. We don't cry as they shoot or we're beaten. The police photograph the dying beach before it sinks. The beach gets closer to the bottom. The beach falls, and the city tells us that from now on, our names are no longer our names. The city screams to this dying beach, stop being dead. The city empties its Glocks into the beach and weeps. The city lights candles, sings ceremonial songs to commemorate its own death. The story begins and ends with the infected beach collapsing. Because the beach is dead, the city can now love itself. Because the beach is dead, the city can now see itself as a helpless victim of history. The waves are howling, the sand is howling. We cheer for the dying beach because if we don't cheer, the city beats us. It starves us. It shoves septic things into our noses and mouths. The city keeps smashing the dying beach, smashing and smashing till the sand and the rocks are obliterated. It says to the dying beach, don't die, we love you so much. But the beach keeps dying and the city keeps shooting it. And we pray that when the sun comes up, we will have another beach. And I pray that when the sun comes up, I will have another body. After Plato threw the poets out of the Republic, some went to countries where they kill you, and others were sent to countries where they couldn't give a fuck about the stupid things poets have to say. The dying beach swirls in the wind. A creek grows out of the sand, but it's quickly exterminated. The middle of the story keeps asking to become the end, but form cannot contain the burden of the dying beach. There are no rocks to sit on anymore. There are only dead fish, ash, holes where once there was sand. So the second act begins with two quotes. The first from the University of Chicago economist and the so-called father of neoliberalism, Milton Friedman, who says, quote, "The great virtue of a free market system is that it does not care what color people are. It only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. It is the most effective system we have discovered to enable people who hate one another to deal with one another and help one another." And Pablo Neruda, from his poem, from a series of poems about the Spanish Civil War, says, "Y por las calles la sangre de los niños corría simplemente como sangre de niños." And through the streets, the blood of the dead children, the blood of the children ran simply like blood of children. Lake Michigan, scene 10. The police shooting boys are like police shooting boys, and the Nazis burning Jews are like Nazis burning Jews, and the police protecting Nazis are like police protecting Nazis, and the prisoners who are tortured are like prisoners who are tortured, and the psychologists overseeing torture are like psychologists overseeing torture, and the mayor privatizing prisons is like the mayor privatizing prisons, and the rule of law being suspended is like the rule of law being suspended, and the broken prisoners on the beach are like broken prisoners on the beach. I dream I am pregnant, and my baby is a revolutionary plan to destroy the global economy. And my baby is like a baby with a bullet in its mouth, who's like a baby with a bullet in its mouth, who's like a baby with a bullet in its mouth. And the disappearing public employees are like disappearing public employees, and the puddle of vomit from a tortured prisoner is like a puddle of vomit from a tortured prisoner, and the hunger of an actual child is the hunger of an actual child, and the basic function of the economy is the basic function of the economy, and the politically impossible is the politically inevitable, and the bourgeois savages are like bourgeois savages, and the bourgeois savages who do not see themselves as savages are like bourgeois savages who do not see themselves as savages, and the bodies that are expropriated for private purposes are like bodies expropriated for private purposes. And when they disappear into the pinhole of capital, they disappear into the abyss of capital. When they disappear into the abyss of capital, there is that silence when everyone refuses to act because they're too concerned with their own material health to care about the broken body of another. And the wasted food on the beach is like wasted food on the beach. And the starving children who are not allowed to eat the wasted food on the beach are like starving children who are not allowed to eat wasted food on the beach. And the bourgeois savages do not notice the broken bodies until they are beaten in their bourgeois backyards. And they say, "How dare you use my backyard to beat this broken body? I will look away if only you don't beat them in my backyard." And they say, "One broken body in my backyard doesn't count for anything." And they are like people who think that one broken body doesn't count for anything. And a massacre at a black church is a massacre at a black church. And a massacre at an elementary school is a massacre at an elementary school. And the Nazis with torches are like Nazis with torches. And the police who kill are like police who kill. And the dying sand is like dying sand. And the refugee arrested for speaking the wrong language is a prisoner who never learns to speak the right language. And the bomb is like a bomb, and the anesthetic is like anesthetic. And the blankness of the city is like the blankness of the city. And the language of the riot is the language of the riot, and the blood of the silenced is like the blood of the silenced, and the blindness of the bourgeois savage is like a mouth that can't stop biting, a body that refuses to die. I'll read one more from Lake Michigan and then conclude with some stuff from a new project. Lake Michigan, scene 11. 15 men around a van from the Department of Streets and Sanitation. The men push from the side and back. The van is rocking up and down. It is starting to tip. More men come to the side. 9 pushes and it bounces, but it doesn't quite flip, and a bunch of men walk away as a horn blares loudly, as if telling the men to stop. The mechanics of flipping a van over. Push until it's bouncing, and once it bounces high enough, lift from the bottom. 11 more pushes and the van falls over onto the driver's side, and there is a celebratory whoop as the men walk away, knowing that no one is ahead of his time. A riot is a thing that decides how it is to be done, and who among these men wants to consider the very long history of how he has ever acted or how he has ever felt? What do they see when they looked at the flipped-over van? The flipped-over van, the long pole busting the glass, the fire and the smoke bombs, the men and women with scarves over their faces taking what they can from the municipal vehicles. The war that has formed their relationship to the composition of the city. The war that has formed the police officers' punitive relationship to the bodies that occupy the city. The innocence of rudimentary violence is the devouring power of negation. Who are the bodies when the bodies are not flipping over the van? What do they wish to compose when they are not composing the destruction of the city? What do they feel about the city and its refusal to absorb them? What do they feel about the state and its desire to spit them out? How will they be absorbed and how will they be ejected? There's distribution and despair, and there are the things we decide to see when we look and the things we decide to see when we shield our eyes from the pain. What else is there to be done once the van has been flipped over? What steps do we need to take to create lasting structural changes in our neighborhood, our city, our nation? How many vans should be flipped over, and in what order? They ponder these questions with screams, flames, and poles jammed into the glass of cars and storefronts, jammed into the burden to transact, compose, destroy. This is from a new project. I'll conclude with this. Social relations. In the strange crowds in the hungry village on the subway platform in the history of the lyric, there are corpses everywhere. There are murderous cops everywhere. There are Uber drivers everywhere. Corpses everywhere. In 2011, it cost $188 to produce an iPhone. The iPhone sold for $599. The profit margin was 69%. No one saw how the immigrants were chained along the stretch of desert road. They weren't corpses yet, but the bones of their cousins were scattered in the sand, on the playgrounds, in the rock gardens, in the milk and fruit and honey. The profit margin per iPhone decreased 6% between 2011 and 2017, yet overall revenues increased 200% because of a dramatic increase in production. There's a dead body in the dumpster behind the dry cleaners. There's a dead coyote in the dumpster behind the television station. There's a time for cooling down, and when the cop knocks on my door and asks me for my number, I identify myself, and he says, "Why did you try to escape?" And I said, "I did not try to escape." And he sang a song that began with a conditional, continued in the subjunctive mood, ended with an imperative. an unanswerable question, an insult, a beating. The bed is not a place of peace. There are bodies under the bed. There are children hiding with the bodies under the bed, dead dogs, the history of our reproduction, the history of the skin they ripped from our arms, of the dead skin that fell from our hands, of the gunk that fell from our eyeballs, of our hair follicles. We can analyze the dead bodies by talking about the circulation of capital, interest on loans, the social relationship of labor, the relationship between money and value, the regulation and deregulation of national and international markets, the alienation of labor, the love between user and operating system about which so many romantic movies are now made. Or we could talk about murder. It's indecent to ask why one man is so rich when another is so poor. There are corpses in so many closets. The workers put in 8-hour days, but it only takes 3 hours of labor for the company to recoup its production costs. Marx referred to that 5-hour difference as surplus labor. Free labor is the root, surplus labor is the root of profit. Private property sustains itself while creating dead bodies and inciting the revolution of the proletariat. Ugly sentence. The white fathers are disenfranchised. There are corpses in the white father's closet. The average retailer makes a 400% profit on a dead body. It doesn't cost very much to make a dead body in countries without unions or labor regulations. The workers understand that value is a social relation, labor is a social relation. They tell their children that if there's one thing they should understand about history, it's that labor and value are both social relations, and if we need to destroy private property in order to smash the bourgeoisie, then so be it. To get back to a 3% growth rate, which most economists argue is necessary for sustainable capitalism, we will need to destroy ourselves and the planet and the fathers and the sisters and the earth and the sea and the dolphins and the political frameworks of the global south and the overdeveloped north and the underdeveloped east. And if we need to use violence to save the planet from total global destruction at the hands of unregulated capitalism, then here, take this baseball bat and smash some windows, please, sang the president of the World Bank to the labor union. He wanted the media to think he was not in the pocket of the wealthy fathers. The revolution had already been commodified, but what had yet to be accomplished was the funding of a legitimate resistance movement to be built up, then obliterated by all the tanks and troops and weapons at the disposal of the state and its financiers. My neighbor retired with no pension, and now he eats cat food and rotten vegetables from the dumpster. He left his house one morning and forgot to wear his shoes. He forgot to wear his socks, and he forgot to wear his pants. He forgot to wear his shirt, and he forgot to wear his coat. I'm sorry, he told his children when they found him with hypothermia near the river. The only explanation he could give, I forgot I was looking for food. Thank you.